Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Insurance Europe's second Wake Up to the Pension Challenge event as part of the European Retirement Week. This year, again, we would like to focus on the role of financial literacy and financial education as a way to bridge the pension savings gap and achieve pension adequacy for all. But this year, we also would like to have a specific focus on the pension gender gap, because indeed, we know that not only do we have a problem with too many people not saving for the retirement, but we also have a problem of gender pension gap, meaning that the proportion of women not saving for their retirement remains higher than that of men. This was in fact apparent from the results of the pension survey that Insurance Europe conducts on every other year. And the latest version showed in 2021 that whereas the proportion of people not saving for their retirement is 38%, the proportion of women not saving is 42%. And so we would like to look at this question in particular. And we also heard, in fact, on Monday from Commissioner Schmidt that the pension gender gap is twice as high as the pension pay gap. So there is really an issue here in relation to the question of the pensions. We have three panelists to help us navigate this complicated question today. And we will start with Professor Vera Hoorens from the KU Leuven, who has doctoral degrees in psychology and history. I think this is certainly a good basis to discuss the topic that we are having on our agenda today. And Professor Hoorens is going to, in particular, share with us some of the findings of a project called Mind the Gap in Pensions, a research project co-funded by the European Commission, in which she was involved together with researchers from the CEPS and from a number of institutions across Europe, if I'm not mistaken, from Portugal, Slovenia, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein. So without further ado, Professor Hoorens, I give you the floor for your presentation of the main findings of the project. Thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present some findings from the psychological work package of the Mind Gap in Pensions project. The driving question behind this psychological work package was answering the question if psychological factors, in addition to cultural and so on factors, are involved in those features of women's careers that adversely affect their pensions. And we got findings from a number of online surveys on gender differences, on variables, a whole bunch of variables of relevance to pension preparedness. We have data from many samples, including some representative samples of the Belgian population of active age, whom we reached through the iVox panels. And these are the data sets that I'm going to present some results on, and I'm going to focus only on those variables, or a few of them, where we found significant gender differences. One question that we were interested in is if women are perhaps less informed about their state pension because they seek less information about it. And as a first step, we asked the members of our sample to indicate of a number of 8 potential sources where they sought information about their future state pension. And I present the data here. The light line are the men, the dark line is the women, and as you can see, both men and women seek information in only few sources, but women seek pension information on fewer sources than men do. You can see here the average is below 2, and the difference between men and women, I can tell you, is significant. But when we had a closer look at our data, we could see that mypension.be, which is the official website of the Belgian pension agency, um, of the government, that mypension.be is the most frequently used source by both genders. So we wondered if the gender difference that we observed here was perhaps due to women using that source more extensively than men, and perhaps women being more satisfied with the information from that source. So to answer that question, we also asked in another sample how much time and effort people had spent or planned to spend seeking information about their future pension on mypension.be on a scale from 1 to 5, excuse me. And as you can see here, both men and women reported not having spent much time and effort seeking information about their future pension on mypension.be, but women again spent less time and effort on it than men. So the question is one that no, women do not spend more time and effort on mypension.be than men do. Quite on the contrary, they spend less time and effort on it. So we wondered um, if perhaps women seek more information about means to complement their state pension so that they are less interested perhaps in their state pension. So we also asked people how much time and effort they spent seeking information about a whole bunch of manners to complement um, their state pension. And again, we did not find that women spent as much time and effort doing that, or even more. Quite on the contrary, women report having spent less time and effort seeking information on any means to complement their future state pension. So women seek much less information about what to do to make sure that they are financially secure in old age. And that raised the question if women perhaps care less about their future pension, and if women have other priorities rather than that. To answer that question, we asked our respondents for all those career events that they consider at least to some extent voluntary. So we here excluded career events that happen to people and that is not of their own choice at all. We asked them what the role in the decision that they made was of the expected impact of the career event on their future pension. And these are the results from our biggest representative sample. And as you can see here, we again find a gender difference, but it is in an opposite direction. In fact, if anything, it seems that women want to take their future pension more into account than men do, at least when they make career decisions that they feel at least some freedom of choice in. This is not a finding that we replicated in one of our other samples. There we found no gender difference, but in any case, we may conclude that women certainly do not care less about their future than men do. If anything, it's quite the contrary. So here we are facing kind of a puzzle. On the one hand, women do less to get informed about their future pension than men do, but they seem to care at least as much as men about their future pension. So to solve that riddle, that apparent contradiction, one of the questions we asked was, do women perhaps experience less freedom of choice in their career decisions? And remember, the last graph was about career events where women experience at least some degree of freedom, and men also experience it. So we also asked men and women how free they had been to start working full time, part time, and so on. And as you can see here, the differences are not big, but they are statistically significant. For all four career events that might happen to someone, um, women report somewhat less freedom of choice than men do. Again, it's not a big difference, but it is statistically significant. So part of the riddle here might be women do care at least as much about their pension as men do, but because they experience less freedom of decision to decide how their career will take shape, they do not find it worth the effort to get informed a lot about what it means for their future pension because they cannot use that information effectively anyway. Um, Another part of the answer might be that perhaps women are still less financially literate than men, so that again they do not see the usefulness of getting well informed and in trying to make decisions based on that. So what we did in our sample was borrow the financial literacy scale developed by Luzardi and Michel. That is a scale with 3 questions that yields a score from 0 to 3. 3 is relatively well financially literate. 0 is not at all. And we administered that scale to our samples. And in fact, this is a result from one of the samples, but we found it in all the samples that we tested. Both men and women are not very literate financially, but women are even less financially literate than men are. And we found that in all the age groups that were included in our sample. So it is possible that part of the answer here is that women do not get informed well, perhaps because their financial literacy is so low. While we were preparing our service, we also wondered if it could be useful to measure knowledge of the pension system in men and women separately from financial literacy. And there were no standardized measures of that. So we developed a pension knowledge quiz of our own that measured knowledge about the Belgian pension system because our studies were in Belgium. That was a quiz with 7 questions, so people could have a score from 0 to 7. And these are the results of our main sample. As you can see, pension knowledge in general is quite low. None of our subgroups reached a score that would be a pass if this were an exam. We also found an age difference. The older participants were, the better they did on our pension knowledge quiz. But again, except in the oldest age group, there is a clear gender difference. Although men know little about the pension system, women know even less, and the difference is particularly great among the youngest age groups, and that is quite worrisome because the youngest age groups are the groups that are in a position to make career decisions that will affect their future pension, or that can start participating in private initiatives to ensure their financial security in old age. And it is exactly in those youngest age groups that we find the biggest gender difference in pension knowledge. Now, knowing that, we started wondering if men and women are aware at all of the gender pension gap and if they are equally aware of it. So we asked men and women, how much pension do you expect for yourself and for your partner? We did not ask it here, men in general or women in general, because we thought, okay, the person of the opposite sex, at least in heterosexual relationship, would be their partner. So it would be most feasible for participants to estimate um, the pension they expected their partner to have rather than men in general or women in general. And what we found here is that both men and women are to some extent aware of the gender pension gap. As you can see, men expect a lower pension for their partner for themselves, and women expect a somewhat higher pension for their partner than for themselves. But much to our surprise, it seems that women are much less aware of the gender pension gap than men are. So women simply do not seem not to see how much lower their personal pension will be than their partners. So to return to the title of this event, Wake Up to the Challenge, wake up to which challenge? Well, I think it's important to support women's freedom of choice in their career. It's also still important to try and enhance the financial literacy of women. In our sample, it was still lower as it was in past studies. We also found that it's important to enhance the knowledge of especially young women about the pension system and what that means for their personal pension. It's important to encourage women to get informed about this. It's not that they do not care, but the step from caring about their future pension and getting informed seems to be large, particularly in women. And it seems particularly important to enhance women's awareness of the gender pension gap. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to get in touch with the coordinator of the Migape project, Gijs Dekkers of the Belgian Federal Planning Bureau, or with me on our email addresses. But our email addresses are also available on the Migape website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vera, for this very, very insightful presentation. And I would say that if you want to tackle a problem, you need to know in detail what you want to tackle to have the right data. And certainly this project is giving a lot of very concrete responses and opening a lot of very concrete questions about issues that need to be tackled. And I guess some of the conclusions are a bit concerning as we hear that there is really an issue of low knowledge of pension systems, low literacy. In fact, not only with women, but with a particular challenge for women, and as we heard, in particular, young women. So we will discuss some of these issues with our two panelists, and they've also been invited to comment and to comment on recommendations as well. And we have today with us to discuss these questions Mariya Mincheva, who is Vice President of the Bulgarian Business Association and chair of the Social Protection Committee of Business Europe. And we have also Mary Collins, who is senior policy and advocacy coordinator at the European Women's Lobby. And I would suggest to start with you, Mariya, to share your take on the question of the gender pension gap in particular. I would be interested to hear whether you think that the gap is decreasing and whether there are specific measures that should be taken to accelerate the reduction of the gap, and also potentially to comment on what you just heard. But so the floor is yours, and thanks very much for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all once again, and congratulations, first of all, to Professor Hoorens for the very interesting report. She presented just a small part of it. I was happy to read the whole report available on their website. So it's a very important topic, and a topic that employers are very vocal, because we need all the people, all the workforce engaged on the labor market. And then the discussions with governments around how to support people go back to the labor market, and how to engage that in the end policies that we produce today, they're effective in the future, because the pensions systems, they are systems of the future and they're not systems of the past. So we need to encourage people to be contributing actively throughout their whole life. And when we speak of pension gap, this is, of course, the result of the decisions made earlier in life. So, what I hear from the presentation today, and from the main conclusions and the proposals, is that generally we want to change people's behavior by increasing their awareness of the problem, by increasing their knowledge about a certain problem, and this is clearly that. But then how to get there? In our view, governments need to create the right conditions to support people to make the decisions that are right for them. We see that policy changes today takes at least 50 years to influence the measured gender pension gap. This is also mentioned in the report, that today's structure of the society is very different and has changed significantly and fundamentally when it comes to educational attainment, labor market participation, and earnings. And then the gender pension gap is constantly changing as new cohorts are retiring. So clearly we need to encourage people to invest in their future, to increase the self-responsibility, and clearly I fully support the financial literacy. We need a good level of understanding why pension savings are important, and this should happen at a very early stage in life, so that people are motivated and they understand why they should invest for their late years in life. We have a demographic challenge. We have an aging population across Europe. We have at the same time large shares of co-contributions from the state budgets to finance the systems. So, as it is stated in the report, many people seem to attach a rather low importance in their future pension, and this is clearly something that needs to be addressed today if we want to have an impact in the next decades. So I stop here at this stage because maybe we want to have an interactive discussion on this, but clearly awareness and knowledge should be increased. Pension systems are very, very complex, and it is quite understandable that not everyone needs to be a pension expert. And this information should be provided in a very simple, easy to understand way to people throughout their life, so they could really assess what is the importance of doing something today in the effect of these decisions in the future.
Very good. Thanks very much, Mariya. A lot of food for thought, and you touched on a number of very important issues in how to bridge the pension savings cap in general, and achieve pension adequacy in general and for women in particular. Mary, may I ask you to share your thoughts on the topic?
Indeed, and good morning, everybody, and thank you very much on behalf of the European Women's Lobby. We're very happy not only to be here, but also with the studies that's just been presented now. I think we need to talk more and more about the gender pension gap. It's only something that we've begun to look at very recently. For example, we haven't had really a lot of data at EU level. It's only a couple of years ago that we've actually looked at what is the gender pension gap. And therefore, we have to really put the gender pension gap into a broader set of measures and the picture as well. Because at the end of the day, the gender pension gap is the accumulation of gender gaps throughout the life cycle and throughout particularly women's lives. And we're talking particularly about pay and earnings. So we see that the pension gap is actually the other side of the coin of the gender pay gap. There's a gender pay gap, a stagnant, I would say, gender pay gap of an average of 16% that had at EU level and has existed for years and years and years. And what we see now is a gender pension gap that is more than double that. So obviously it is the accumulation, and we need to look at the whole life cycle in order to be able to address the gender pension gap and particularly women's pensions in the end of their lives, of their working lives. So we're still operating very much in a male life cycle model. What does that mean? It means 40, 45 years uninterrupted career. That rarely reflects the majority of women's lives. And I would say more and more today, it rarely reflects young, particularly young generation of men as well. So we need to look at that. We need to look and see, well, what is the model that we should be really addressing and pushing for? And we believe that we need to move from a male breadwinner model to a equal earners, equal carers model. Because what are the reasons why women's pensions are so, I would say, dire at the end of their lives is because they've stepped out of the labour market, and particularly in terms of caring. They've been, taking the brunt of caring responsibilities, and they are being sanctioned. At the end of their lives, they're being sanctioned. And I'm not just talking about childcare, talking about care needs throughout the whole life cycle. As was already said, we're in an aging population, and women are also taking care of elderly relatives, family members, and family members who have dependent needs. We need to break that, and we need to ensure that both women and men have the possibility in their lives to be carers and to be earners. And therefore, our pension systems must also reflect that. So one of our proposals is that there should be care credits for pensions, both for women and for men, not only for women, because as I said, women have been taking the brunt of care and are being sanctioned along the way. What we see also is a move to these, what we call the second and third pillar pensions, which are more insurance based, and also there's no real equality within those systems either. Because if we look at the second pillar, the occupational pillar, what we see is that in sectors, we're in 2022 today, but we're still functioning in a very highly segregated gender labour market, where we have concentration of women in some sectors, concentration of men in other sectors. In the majority of sectors where women work, high levels of part-time work, and pay as well, differentiated pay as well. So what we see that's reflected as well in the occupational pension systems, because the contributions will be also on a part-time basis. So it's never going to fill the gap or actually close the gap along the way. In terms then of the third pillar pension, which is more the private pension, it's not surprising that there are more men contributing to that because they earn more throughout their lives. And then we have systems as well that give tax benefits and rebates. So we need to really crack that, because this is about solidarity throughout our lives and also closing the gaps between women and men, because at the end of the day, women, the high levels of poverty as they age. And we know that today, faced with galloping energy, food prices, inflation at our doorstep, that it is a major problem for women, particularly as they age. So we would like to see the second and third pillar. We don't really have a lot of data about the gender aspects of those two pillars. And we would like to really see a comparative study about the take up and what is the situation regarding occupational pensions for women compared to men throughout the EU, and also to look at the treatment of how do these pillars really address the issues of what we would call career breaks, but when you step out of the labour market to give birth or to take care of elderly children or anybody else, how do these systems actually compensate that? Do they compensate it? We don't think they do, but we have to have more data and more thorough analysis of that. And therefore, and we would also like to see an EU framework for evaluating second and third pillar schemes from a gender perspective. Because we believe that these second and third pillar, they're not the way forward in terms of closing the gaps, but we do need to look at them more closely, because coming back to the question, what are the challenges? The challenges are for the young women and men of today in terms of their pensions for the future. And obviously they will be working longer as well. So we need to really look at the system from a holistic perspective, and to ensure that both women and men along their lives can step in out of the labour market and will not be sanctioned. And therefore an equal earner, equal carer model that will be reflected in the pension system for us is one of the ways forward. I'll leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, and thanks for making a clear link between labor market aspects and pension aspects, because obviously there is this link and this and the fact that to an extent the pension gender gap is reflecting differences in the labor market. It's not the full picture, but it's certainly one aspect. I would nevertheless be interested in your views on some of the points mentioned by Vera, in particular around the very low knowledge of pension systems of especially young women, or also the very low knowledge on how state pensions work, and is there something that you think can be done, should be done? Do you have any recommendation on how to address that knowledge gap, especially as we heard for in the case of young women, and we know that there is a long-term aspect in pensions, and the saving that is being done at a young age can make a big difference at an older age. So there is of course a question of being able to save, but as we heard from Vera, there seems to be a real interest in finding information and not necessarily finding that information. So I don't know if this is something you have been looking into.
Mm-hmm. I have spoken quite often with young people about whether they know about the importance of pension. Do they know how important it is to be in the formal economy and not in the informal economy? Do they know how important it is that they don't have big interruptions in their working careers? And at this stage of life, when you're young, you don't think that this will come soon. You don't think that this will affect you. It seems a problem that is so far away. And here exactly comes the financial literacy that was mentioned, and the awareness of people at every stage of their life, not only on the pensions. Pensions are very important, but financial literacy in general is an important aspect to make young people aware why their decisions are important. And I already said that. But then it should become the narrative of the politicians as well. When they promote different reforms in the pension systems, it is quite often very high expert conversations with complex formula. And in a way, this is a topic which is not explained in a simple way to the society. So people are just need to know if their pensions will increase, and will this affect them? And in a way, they think they need to rely a lot on the state to take care of them when they can't. And to us, it is important to make this mindset in young people, in working people, because this is the best time to invest in yourself when you are young, and when you are able to earn, and when you're in good health. So this is the best time to start saving for your future pension plans. When I was saying that governments have a responsibility also to create a supportive environment for people to access the labor market, there's few things that are important to be done to avoid long interruptions of the working careers. And one thing is the availability, the effective access, and the sustainable financing to social services that are standard based. So they give you trust that when you have a small child or you have a member of the family that needs long term care, there are good standard based social services that can support people in need. So women that are most often engaged in these care responsibilities, they could trust their closest one to facilities, private or public or co-shared management of these facilities, but they need to have a place where they can trust their beloved ones, and this is the good care services. So the investments in care services, be they child care or long-term care, is really critical and important, and it was underestimated for many years in different member states. I would say also effective access to healthcare systems, because we need to avoid, once again, long interruptions in working careers. Because if there is not a good culture of prevention, a good culture of healthy lifestyle, in the end, we end up with people at their 50s that are not in best shapes, that have many chronic diseases. We end up with working places that are not fit for people with some medical conditions. And then in the end, you end up with the gender pension gap. Um, uh, maybe I stop here. But there are a lot of things that could be improved throughout the, the working life and the entire life. And it's a matter really to the right approach, to understanding of the problem, to understanding of the importance also by the politicians that set up the framework, and to make this available in a simple way to the people of their youngest age.
Yes, thanks very much. I think you are touching on really important points, and I think you are absolutely right when saying that we have maybe underestimated the importance some of these aspects, and we are now realizing how important having efficient healthcare, social care systems is, not only for the people benefiting from it, but also from an economic growth, economic development point of view. And that is something we are realizing, and we will probably realize even more in an aging society. And I think that links back to the recommendations that Mary made on potentially having care credits for pensions, and also in the context of the development of the second and third pillars. So, Mary, I'm turning to you. Any reaction to that, and also any view on the question of the role that financial literacy, financial education can play in helping women to some extent take care of their pension and prepare themselves for an older age?
Yep, thank you, and fully agree with what was previously said. We need to really invest and make it a societal issue. Investing in care systems, health systems, it's for everybody's benefit. And while women live longer, the actual quality of years, the number of their quality of years is actually lower. So we need to, look at the whole picture as well. So coming back to the literacy, financial literacy, I would say that it's more of a symptom rather than the cause. And yes, the systems are quite complex, and they use a language as well that's not very accessible. That's quite difficult. And I think it's for a number of reasons. We're dealing with different systems. So if we go back to the first pillar, the state pension, obviously we have all contributed, and we are contributing to social protection and social security systems. And I think it's very important that this is our collective mechanism of solidarity, set up many years ago by previous generations, And we must make sure that that is the solidarity, the safety net that it was set out to be, and to really cover all situations of life, and particularly as well as we age, and pensions as well, really important. So it's very important that we have a very solid first pillar pension that actually allows both women and men to live in dignity as they age. So that's one issue. And I think also we need to look at the gender pay gap again, because if we close the gap, women will contribute more to those systems as well, in terms of tax, but in terms of social security contributions as well. So it's a win-win. When it comes to the other systems, so second and third, we're talking about insurance-based. And I think the interest is different to the first pillar, because we're talking about insurance systems that are also, fluctuating on financial markets and that. And this is where it gets really extremely complex in terms of the language as well that's used. Words like actuarial factors, issues like that make it extremely complex. So sometimes I suppose the challenge is it done on purpose, or is there a way of really making that language much more accessible as well? Because information is power, but having accessible language as well is power as well. And I think that we need to really, look at the whole picture. Are we actually communicating in a way that enables this generation, younger generations, older generations, to actually make those choices and make those decisions that have already been talked about? So language is not neutral. And so we need to ensure that the information that we're using is actually accessible and can be understood. And I just want to let you know that at the European Women's Lobby, we ran a campaign on pensions a couple of years ago, and also to look at the consequences throughout the life cycle, and also to have an intergenerational perspective as well. So in the campaign, we interviewed a number of women from different age categories as well. And it's true that for younger women, projecting into their future, when they realize that, wow, there are these massive gender pension gaps, and the fear of actually going towards a system where they're going to end up in poverty, or having to choose between a career or having children. These are the kind of choices that those systems actually confront women with in their early lives as well. So we have to look at it all. And I think talking about it, making it more accessible, doing the studies that you've just done is really, really important. And the campaign we did a few years ago, we will have to redo it again, because I think it's important not just to do it a once off, but actually engage in more debates, more conversations about what pensions mean, and particularly from an intergenerational perspective as well. I think that's really important. Thank you. Leave it at that.
Very much, and also on your previous suggestion on the need to understand better the functioning of the second and third pillars, and obviously that's something which has to be done at national level, because there are such differences in how pension systems are organized. And as you know, there are certain member states where the second pillars are very developed, which is not the case in other countries, and the same goes for the third pillar. And I think there is indeed interest in understanding the different aspects that we have discussed today as part of these pillars, and how the gender element can be incorporated. I would maybe comment on your point on having easily understandable information about products being sold in the as part of the second and third pillar. It's clear that there is an element of complexity in the products, but that should not necessarily translate into complexity at the moment where products are being offered. And I think there is a real interest here in by providers in having simple information being passed on to policyholders, beneficiaries. There is nevertheless also an element of link to the legislation, which is sometimes obliging providers to what we call information overload. And that's definitely something that needs to be looked into, because it's in no one's interest for information to be excessively complex and therefore act as a barrier to accessing certain products. And another element that probably needs to be given consideration is the extent to which these products can be offered through digital means, because that's also what the new generation is expecting, more digital distribution as opposed to face-to-face and contacts and paper information, paper-based information. So that's also something we believe needs to be looked at. I would now ask, I mean, we are definitely reaching the end of our event, and I think Vera is still with us, and she has listened to the conversation, and I would like to invite her to share her thoughts on what she heard, and then maybe I will give our other panelists a last chance to comment and draw some final conclusions. But first, Vera, you've been patiently listening to us, so please, can you share your thoughts and any question? And I would say probably some of the follow-up tasks may end up with you. So, are you willing to contribute to bridge that knowledge gap in order to finally bridge also the gender pension gap?
Well, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to respond, and thank you for the very interesting thoughts that have been exchanged. I've heard a lot that I thought, yeah, indeed, there is evidence supporting that. One thing that triggered me was the the idea that the gender pension gap is partly due to a gender pay gap, which is obviously true. But it seems that the other difference between men's and women's careers that has also been mentioned plays a large role, and that is the structure of women's careers as compared to men's careers. To a large extent, the gender pension gap is due to the fact that women have more periods where they do not work, do paid work, or do not work full time to take up care tasks. And indeed, closing the gender pension gap will require closing the gap in opportunities that men and women have to do paid work and take up care tasks. So indeed, that male breadwinner model is to a large extent responsible for the gender pension gap. One thing that I also wanted to add is that in my presentation as a psychologist, I of course focused very much on psychological differences at the individual level, but I agree very much with the speakers that much of the causes of the gender pension gap are beyond people's individual control. Much is due to the way society is structures and the structural institutional differences between men and women that individual men and women cannot like um, um, reduce of their own accord. One thing that I also found really interesting is the idea that it's really hard to reach young men and young women with information about pensions, not just because information is complicated, but because they tend to think, oh, that's far away in the future, and whatever disaster that might happen that will um, enhance my risk of poverty in old age won't happen to me. Um, we have some data on that too. And the idea, well, adversities will not happen to me, indeed seems to be present. But, and here comes the catch, it seems that men think that more than women do. So the it's not that women more than men have like this happy-go-lucky attitude. Quite on the contrary. And we also found some evidence when we tried to examine the links between the various measurements, um, that optimism about the future is not a major cause of not being prepared for one's pension. It seems to be quite the opposite. It seems to be the case that people who are quite optimistic about how their financial future will dare to collect more information and seek more information about their pensions. It's rather like we got the impression from our data that women being vaguely aware of that there might be bad news waiting for them about their pension avoid pension information rather than seeking it out. And that, of course, creates a vicious circle where people close their mind to pension information. There is some data, by the way, on take up of it, participating in second and third pillar of pensions, but there again, as has already been mentioned, men take more initiatives than women do, probably because they can. So there was quite a lot that resonated with me. And there are quite some obstacles, and it has already been mentioned, many other obstacles besides the ones that I have mentioned for women to take initiative of their own to make sure that they will have a good pension. So indeed, a lot of work is left to do. Perhaps I don't want to scare all women, but in one of our other studies, we found that both men and women are to some extent aware that sustained full-time employment is the way to get a good pension. But if we ask, what do you think being employed full-time would mean to you personally? It seems that women are much more afraid than men are that it might harm their personal relationships. So women seem to be aware that starting to work full time or continuing to work full time might cost them personally. And I will leave it to that.
Thanks very much. A lot of food for thought and material for follow-up discussions. Thank you so much. Mariya, any final closing remarks?
Mariya, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm extremely, delighted to listen about the psychological effects, because this is very rarely used as an approach. And in fact, in the end of the day, psychology is something that defines our behavior and decisions and gives explanation to so many things. So I'm really delighted to listen to these thoughts. I wanted to give a final word about the pension system. It was mentioned 2 times about the second and the third pillar, and in my view, the 2 second and third pillar, they will become increasingly important. And in fact, the information campaigns and awareness should be mostly directed in this direction. Because these are to a large extent personal savings. There is not the solidarity principle. It is up to us, especially the third one, to invest in packages that are good for our incomes and future decisions. And one final word is there are few initiatives linked by the Commission's work program initiated by the pillar of the social rights. You know that there is a high-level expert group on the future of social protection and welfare state. And one of the recommendations that were signaled by Business Europe on the public hearing and linked to information is, in fact, to propose to the Commission to develop a yearly report on the main trends at the national level with respect to the financing of the social protection, including both financial and social protection designs and delivery aspects. And I think as the social protection is a competence of the member states, and it must be competence of the member states, but the Commission could support the level of understanding and the provision of information that could be further used by the national governments by delivering this yearly report. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for stressing the importance of the second and third pillars. I would certainly agree with that, and also for pointing to the importance of psychology. And one aspect we have not discussed today is how to further increase people's ability and willingness to save. And one tool that is increasingly being discussed here is automatic enrollment, with the idea that people are automatically enrolled in an occupational pension scheme with the possibility to opt out. But here there is this idea of nudging people to save, which seems to be efficient on the basis of the experience of countries where this is in place now. And clearly there is also an element of psychology there. So thanks very much. And for pointing to the work of the Commission in the social area. So Mary, the last word will be for you today.
Well, thank you so much. And so I think what really we need to look at pensions in a holistic way. I think pensions mirror the life cycle. They're not just a moment in your life, but it's actually the accumulation of all the past. So I think it's really important. And it's the gender pension gap, which I should mention is nearly 40%, 40% on average in Europe. If we look at all of the pillars together, it's massive, absolutely massive, which means that, for every €100 that men get, women get 60, basically, at the end of the day. So I think this is the reality. So when we're trying to talk about pensions and make it a reality for our lives, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about very low levels of income as women age. But it's a collective, and a structural issue. And we can only do it really collectively. And we really need to make sure that care, because care is very, very prominent in all of our lives. And the fact that women have been, taking the burden or the responsibility, the main responsibility for care. So we need to also work on the fact that men too make it a normal, make it part of their lives too. And I can see shifts in the younger generation of men where they really want to have more, I would say, quality rather than quantity. So these are the kind of moments as well where we can really begin to look at the equal earner, equal carer model, and to ensure that we have pension credits for both women and men for later on in their lives. But we also need to look at today, because I think when you enter into a pension system at the beginning of your working life, the rules change along the way. So we mustn't also overlook the what is there today and some of the barriers for women in today's, who will be, pensioners maybe tomorrow or in a couple of years' time or whatever. So I think it's a generational and it's a long-term system, and the rules change along the way. So it's not just providing information so that we can actually be part of ensure that the system's covered, but also to make sure that how are we going to address the different rules that change along the way as well, because, we're in a very, turmoil world for the moment as well. It has impacts on the insurance schemes of the second and third pillar systems as well. So it's really about having a continuous conversation, so that, as coming back to what Vera said, so that we all take our heads out of the sand and we make this really a collective responsibility for everybody, so that all women and men throughout Europe can live a dignified life as they age. Thank you very much.
Yes, well, thanks very much to the three of you for indeed having this conversation and trying to bridge the knowledge gap and have a discussion about how to bridge indeed the pension gender gap. Obviously, in 1 hour, there is only the possibility to scratch the surface. So I believe we should continue this conversation about concrete measures that can be taken to reach this important objective of bridging the gender pay gap, and in general, reaching adequate pensions for all in Europe. So thanks very much for your participation. Thank you to all listeners, and we look forward to continuing this dialogue in the future. Thanks very much, and have a very nice day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.